Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Nikhil Hira. I head up Deloitte's tax practice for East Africa. And I'm very grateful to see so many of you have turned up today for our event. I know you have to battle traffic in Nairobi, but you seem to have done that. And I understand that I'm competing with what is perhaps a very big football match in the World Cup tonight, which is rather unfortunate, but nevertheless. Having said that, at the end, when we moved to the poolside for for the cocktails, I went and had a look over there, and I see they've got a huge screen over there. So you will be able to follow a bit of the match, I'm sure, from there. I'm really concerned about what it's going to do to Deloitte's bar bill tonight, but anyway, hopefully Alcoblo will solve that problem for me. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, last night we had another terror attack in Makatoni in Ilamu, in which I believe as many as 50 people were killed. And I think it's only appropriate that we just honor a moment of silence for the people that actually lost their lives last night in that attack. Thank you, and may their souls rest in peace. Welcome, Budget 2014. It's very interesting. I've been following budgets for many years, as some of you know. And what I've noticed over the last 2 or 3 years is that they seem to be getting smaller and smaller in terms of not numbers. The numbers are getting much bigger, but in terms of what is said. And indeed, when we on an annual basis, when the budget speech was read, I used to have people at Treasury who would pick up the speech and the revenue estimates and the expenditure estimates and a finance bill. And over the last 3 years, we've not got the finance bill on budget day. So a lot of what we are saying today is based really on what Mr. Rotich, the Cabinet Secretary for the Treasury, said in his speech, with a little bit of perhaps artistic license on our part, where we've interpreted some things which may or may not turn out to be the same. And in the packs that you've got on your chairs, there is our usual budget insight, which covers Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda. And in the Kenya section, as I said, we've used what was said in the speech. Indeed, the other countries did the same, except their speeches were a lot more detailed than ours. In fact, I was looking at the number of pages in these speeches. Ours was about 25 pages. Rwanda was a little about the same. Uganda was 46 pages and Tanzania was 72. And indeed, when I got the first speeches from Tanzania and Rwanda, one was in Kiswahili and the other one in Kinyarwanda. It was a bit difficult it's very, I mean, my Swahili is not bad, but to convert budget deficit from Swahili into English is never an easy thing to do. So I gave up at that point and we waited for the English translation. This evening I'm going to cover with you a very quick look at an overview of the budget expenditure, what was the priority areas that were set, what is being spent where, and indeed how it's expected, what they expect to raise in finances. The areas of focus, education, and I think rightly so. Without good education, we clearly cannot get that economic growth that we're seeking of double digit, and we are unfortunately a very long way away from it, sitting at about 4.7%, but more of that later. The question of free laptops came up again, so that project is ongoing, notwithstanding the various inquiries that are going into it. I made some comments about this last year, and I think I won't do it again this year. But I will say I'm still not convinced that's the right thing that we should be doing, giving laptops to Standard 1. But the second one, computer laboratories for Standards 4 to 8, I think is a very good idea. However, I do feel, and this is what I said last year as well, that unless we improve the infrastructure in our schools, then technology is not going to take us where we have to go. And unless we retrain our teachers to deal with technological advancement and the use of online training, then no matter how many laptops or computer laboratories we have, it's not actually going to achieve the purpose. But I think the idea is absolutely superb. We do need to get technologically advanced, and we need our children to be technologically advanced as quickly as possible. E-learning, there's talk about developing an e-learning curriculum, which I think again is a good thing, and digitalization. And then more importantly, a national school upgrade. And I believe there was something in the papers today, or was it yesterday, where I believe it was Kenya Power said that they would be making sure that there were power connections to a number of schools in rural Kenya so that we could achieve the other things as quickly as possible. And then free secondary education and further investment in teachers, which is all positive as long as we actually implement it. That has been my worry, and I'll talk about that in a minute. On the infrastructure side, we've read, we've seen, we've heard about the new railway, which I think was given the thumbs up again. And indeed, the Railway Development Levy, which was introduced last year, which is the only tax, by the way, that actually exceeded budget during 2013-14, will continue, unfortunately. So imports are going to continue to be a little bit more expensive. Lots of new roads, geothermal plants, airports, including 3 new airports around the country, and a lot of security infrastructure, which, given what we have been going through, particularly another event last night, I think security infrastructure is actually extremely important, and I'm glad to see that there has been an increase in the spending allocation for the police, the NIS and KDF. On the agricultural side, an agri-business fund in conjunction with local banks has been looked at. The irrigation project, which was announced 2 or 3 years ago, is to continue. New dams, reinvestment in machinery and equipment. What concerns me, though, about agriculture is that I believe it still is the backbone of our economy. And the number of people that are employed in small-scale farming around the country is very significant. And yet we're only allocating 3 or 4% of our budget to agriculture, which I feel is a mistake. I think we should be allocating more to it, at least until the other parts of the economy start taking off. On the health, free maternal health, which was one of the Jubilee government's promises, and much of it was implemented. Equipment financing, lots of leasing. In fact, we're going to lease equipment for the hospitals. We're also going to lease equipment for the police and the KDF, helicopters, etc., to assist in the security drive. National hospitals will be funded. There's a talk about how the counties and the central government will work together to handle health. Increased housing infrastructure and recruitment of additional health workers. These are obviously very important things. Without health, without health and education, clearly we're not going to achieve those targets that we want. And then on counties and devolution, again, an area of considerable debate. The counties are going to get about 226 billion this year. I think it's slightly lower than last year. There was talk about assisting them with financial management, which I think is very important, because after all, this is a big chunk of money, and this is what I said last year as well. And allocations to equalization fund for the more marginal areas will be looked at. The whole area of devolution is, to me, extremely revolutionary. I think we are really ahead of the curve on that. But I think the problem is that we're all sitting in this room and we believe that because we devolved in March last year, it should work from day one. But clearly there are a lot of hurdles for the counties to deal with, and I don't know whether that's fallen, but anyway. But it is the right move. I think the decentralization is the right move. But let's not kid ourselves, it's not going to happen overnight. It is going to take 2, 3, maybe even 5 years. Maybe we won't see the real impact of devolution until the election in 2017. So that's something to watch for, I think. Government spending, and I hope you can see these slides, but basically on the left, the column on the left there is recurrent expenditure, followed by development expenditure, the county allocation, contingencies, and then interest payments. I guess the thing that sticks out for me there is that development expenditure is sitting at 30%, which I think is the right thing. However, It has sat at 30% for the last 3 or 4 years, and we have not used it. You will always see that although we're talking about 1.5 trillion or 1.8 trillion, a lot of it is not utilized at the end of the period, at the end of the financial year. So we do need to see how we're going to actually improve and make sure that we do spend the development expenditure. Now, one of the things, and this is purely a personal view as to why I think we're not spending as much as we should, is that the government procurement procedure has become a lot more stringent. And Cabinet Secretary Rotich did actually say that we're looking now at e-procurement and a whole lot of digitalization within government, which I hope will assist in making this easier, and we will actually see money being spent on development. Certainly when you look at all the focus areas that the government has, it's quite clear that they do want to spend on development. It's just a question of whether they can. But my secondary worry, actually maybe it should be a primary worry, is that our recurrent expenditure is not coming under control. And if we don't control the recurrent expenditure, particularly in a period when the economy is sort of stagnating, by any means it's not growing the way we want it to grow. And even though the government has issued figures of 5.5 or 5.8% for next year, I think the reality is going to be much lower than that, particularly with the security issue we have, with the lack of consumer confidence. So if we don't control that recurrent expenditure, then our deficit is going to continue to increase. And that to me is a very big concern. And I think generally, if you look around the world and in Africa, you will see that countries which have high recurrent expenditure tend to come unstuck. This just shows the allocations by various things. The biggest one is, of course, to counties, followed by the consolidated fund and interest payments. I won't go through the detail of this, but this is actually how the 1.58 trillion or the 1.8 trillion gross is actually going to be spent. On the revenue side, income tax continues to be the big earner, which is unfortunate because in reality, what should happen, and if you look at many countries around the world which have a value-added tax, VAT should be the biggest part, the biggest contributor to revenue. Because after all, it's a consumption tax. Every time you buy, at least in the formal sector, you should actually be paying VAT. Now, I got a lot of questions in the last week or so from the press about, well, you know, we had a new VAT Act last year. How come VAT hasn't increased? And to me, there are two reasons. One, it came in the second quarter. It wasn't there for the full year, so we haven't seen a full year impact. And even though it came in on the 2nd of September, it took 30, maybe even 60 days for a number of people who were previously exempt and now have to register because they're standard rated to actually get into the net. And KRA, rightly so, I think, gave them a chance to do that. And then thirdly, I think with the state of the economy and with the lack of consumer confidence, because it's a consumption tax, if people are not consuming, then clearly it's not going to do very well. So what we'd really like to see is VAT surpassing income tax as the biggest contributor to the national revenue pot. But I think we're a little way away from that. It's not quite going to happen yet, but hopefully in the next couple of years it will. And just looking at the last few years, and I do want to make a couple of comments on this slide here, it is very evident that the blue lines on those are the targets that were set at each budget, and the green line is what we actually achieved. And you will see that since 2009-10, we have actually not achieved target in any of the years. Collections have increased, but they have not achieved target, which is going to put added pressure on us in 2014-15, because as you can see, the number is going up quite substantially to just over $1 trillion. In fact, that increase is about 17%. I would also like to comment that I'm a little suspect about some of these figures, because if you look at 2013-14, which is the year that we're in right now, and if you look at the figures that were issued by the KRA and the Treasury at the end of the third quarter, so 31st March, we were actually 54 billion shillings behind in our collection targets at that point. And yet we seem to have, in a sense, lost a bit more here as we go on. But if you look at the previous year, and you see the actual there of 733 billion, which comes from the revenue estimates the government issued on budget day or just before, and you compare them to what was issued in the economic survey, which came out at the end of April, the number in the economic survey was 786 billion projected. So there's a 50 billion difference between what was projected at the end of April and what they're now expecting as of last week. And that's on past figures. So I'm really confused as to how this works, because I would have thought 2012, 2013, we should know how much we actually collected. So we shouldn't be getting these conflicting figures between documents that are coming out from the government. And I think that is a big issue. However, the message. If you look at the three blue lines on the right, you will note that from 2012-13 to 2016-17, tax revenues are expected to almost double. Which means, ladies and gentlemen, you folks out there are going to have to foot this bill. Because KRA is unfortunately continuing to come after the same taxpayers over and over and over again. And I think we have probably got all the golden eggs we can get from those golden geese. I think it's actually come to an end, because I think without an economy that's actually going up, we're not going to be able to get those additional collections. What we are not doing, and haven't been able to do for many, many years, is actually widen our tax net and go into what is commonly known as the Juakali sector. And I've heard a number of reasons why we can't. But to me, the one reason why we can, and I need to be corrected if I'm wrong here, is that on the 30th of April, when the government issued the economic survey for this 2014, Cabinet Secretary Waiguru actually announced that they had created 740,000 jobs in the informal sector. Now it occurs to me that if you can count the number of people that are getting jobs in the informal sector, you can certainly tax them. So I'm not sure whether the number is correct or whether they're ghost workers, I don't know, but the fact remains that there's apparently 740,000 new jobs in the informal sector. And we should be able to bring them into the tax net. And that is one way that we should be able to see us widening the tax bracket, because I think what we're getting now is taxpayer fatigue from those people who are already registered. And incidentally, there are just over 2 million registered individual taxpayers in the country, in a population of 43 million, which is very small by any standards. So that has got to be a focus area for this government and any government going forward. We've got to expand the tax net and bring more people into the net as quickly as possible. Okay, that's all I wanted to say about the overview of the budget. I guess the proof of the pudding is in the eating. We are absolutely superb at writing plans. It's the implementation that we've got to focus on. And this is not a criticism of the current government. I think it's been like this for the last 10, 15, 20 years. We have grand plans, but we don't actually implement as we go along. So I think we need to be very careful on that and make sure that we do actually implement on what we've got here, because if we don't, we will not see that increase in GDP that we actually want. Another interesting fact, I'm told for the first time ever, there is more foreign direct investment going into Tanzania than there is into Kenya. And we're supposed to be the stable one and the big economy. So that's a worry, because Tanzania is clearly taking over and taking those investors from us. I think what we have to remember is that Kenya does not live in isolation. There are a lot of other places that people can put their money. And indeed they will, if we don't focus on the issues which to me are developing our infrastructure, sorting out our security, clamping out on corruption, and widening our tax net. If we do those 4 or 5 things, I think we can see, I'm very optimistic that the future will hold great things for us. So, very quickly, on the other countries that read their budget, the GDP growth rates, and this was, by the way, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda. I understand Burundi read theirs in February. It was in French, and I don't speak French, so I've got to translate that one as well. But we shall probably do a little update on that in a while. GDP growth rates were pretty much as we expected. The powerhouse was Tanzania with the highest growth. I was interested to see that Uganda was pretty close to 7% as well. Rwanda, it seems, took a little bit of a dip this year, but is projecting to go back up again next year. All of us, all 4 countries, are pretty much facing the same issues. Security is now becoming a problem across the board. Health and education was clearly a focus in all the budget statements. Agriculture, in all the budget statements, was not such a focus. We are not spending as much on agriculture as I would have expected us to do, given that this is an agricultural region of the world. Hydrocarbons and mining is going to be the big thing for the future, and clearly there was a lot of focus on that. And infrastructure, a lot has been said in all 4 budgets. We just have to wait to see whether actually anything is done. That's the key point. So we're all faced with the same problem, which is that we have to balance our books somehow, and that is going to be extremely difficult in this region for the short term, I think. So, but more about that a little later. On the taxation measures, there has been, over the last few years, and I think will continue to be over the next few years, a move away from giving incentives and exemptions. Tanzania and Uganda removed several incentives and exemptions that were in place. Rwanda did the same. Kenya did it in their VAT Act. You remember that we had a remission for VAT if you were investing in a project of a certain value. The new VAT Act took that out completely. So we're seeing a complete move away from exemptions and incentives as we go forward. I firmly believe that there was little or no relief for the common mwananchi in any of these budgets. None of them actually looked at our personal tax bands. And I think in a period of high inflation, which all of East Africa has been going through for some time, not adjusting tax bands, I think, was a contrary move. Maybe it'll come when we have the rewrite of the Income Tax Act. The Railway Development Levy I mentioned, it's to continue in Kenya, and interestingly enough, it's going to start in Uganda, except it's being called an infrastructure levy, but for railway. That's what they said in the speech. An infrastructure levy for railway development. Not an easy thing to say at this time of the day, sorry. So it's the same thing as what we've got in Kenya, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see Tanzania introducing it as well, and perhaps Rwanda. And in all cases, plenty of reforms were considered in tax administration, all with the same aim, that we want to expand the tax net, we want to make it easier for people to do business. And with the exception of Rwanda, the other 3 countries have for the last few years ranked in the bottom quartile of the world for the ease of doing business. So we really do need to address that issue. And I often quote that in Rwanda you can incorporate a company in 48 hours. It is still taking us 6 weeks in Kenya. And I'm not sure what it takes in Tanzania and Uganda, but I should think it's pretty similar. So we've got to sort this out. We've got to make it easier to do business. Just to give you another example, a typical business in Kenya will probably make as many as 60 different tax payments a year. By the time you add installment tax, corporate tax, PAYE, withholding tax, VAT, etc. If you add them up, it comes to about 60 payments, which is a lot. And that needs to be streamlined in some way so that we can go forward and be an environment in which it is easy to do business, a conducive environment for it. So that's really what I wanted to say on the budget overview.